Near breaking point, there are now calls for even more migration into the UK and higher taxes. You really cannot believe what is going on right now in the UK. It's getting worse, and I think it's getting very close to breaking point. I was wondering if the Prime Minister would actually resign today after the Epstein files. Oops, we use that word on YouTube here, we're in trouble. If after the release that he would resign. But no, he still hasn't resigned, and he's still around. But what I'm going to talk about today, and we're doing a live stream today here, not a pre-recorded video, but what I'm going to be talking about is sensitive to some people. Whenever I talk about, look, there's zero emotion behind what we're going to talk about today, okay? Around the migration and the taxes. It's purely mathematical. And I have to say that because some people just lose their mind because of these very carefully crafted propaganda campaigns that have been going on for a long time now. And just to let me just prove this to you for those of you who are going to doubt it. One moment. Here we go. So I was looking, this article came out, which many of you may have seen. It came out yesterday, and it said zero net migration would shrink the UK economy by 3.6%, says think tank. So this is the NIESR who came out with this, who are not unbiased, by the way. Let me just say that, but we'll come back to that in a moment. So I said, hold on, I'm sure I saw this article last month, and I started looking through, and I just typed in the search bar here. Anybody can do this. I'm on Google News. Zero net migration would, because I remember that title, okay? And I start going through and I'm going, wow, okay. How many of these articles are there? They go on and on and on and on for a long time. And then there's one here. I want you to see this one. 11th of January, okay? What would the British economy look like with net zero migration? And I said, I knew I'd seen that last month. And you keep going through, and this goes on forever. And you know what that means whenever you see this pattern. It means that they are intentionally trying to influence the public opinion. And I don't think it's too strong a word to call it propaganda, because that is exactly what it is. Now, I did some digging into the think tank here, because they put all this weight behind this think tank, said how great they are and how unbiased and balanced. And it's not difficult to do this research, by the way. You can do this yourself. I started looking through who is in the think tank, going on their social profiles, going on all this other stuff. It's heavily left-leaning. It's incredibly liberal, is what I would say. They all pretty much live in London. I don't know where exactly they live, but I'm pretty sure they don't live in normal areas like the rest of you watching live. They probably live in your sort of, upper-class communities and gated communities and all this sort of stuff. So whenever I see them talking about things like saying, we need more migration, there just isn't enough, we need to ramp this up, it annoys me. It does, and it's not I'm not saying that from an emotional perspective. I'm annoyed because I know the polling. The polling says from the British people that they feel like we're at capacity, and also I don't believe the numbers either. Please drop in the comments your thoughts on this, but I don't believe the numbers that we're at 69 million. Because if you look at the sort of trajectory of this, and that'll be the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, that put this out, the numbers don't match up with what I see when I travel around. Because if you don't know, I live on the Isle of Man now. When my tax rate went sky high in the UK, so high it was ridiculous, I said, hold on, am I going to stay here and pay the equivalent of something like 70% when you account for the business and VAT and personal taxes? Or shall I move somewhere else and pay 20% tax? Well, I think I'm going to move and pay 20% tax instead. And this is what they don't get. This is what these economists and Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, they don't understand, is that if you tax people, this is historical, you can look at this, if you tax people beyond a certain level, you start to, it creates this cascading effect. You'll get the wealthiest people start to move first, and then you'll get the kind of people who maybe they work in finance or they're whatever else, they start to move, and then it sort of trickles down. And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing the trickling down. So it's happening very, very quickly. and sometimes I lose my trail of thought, just like then. I was going to say a bit more, but I wanted to, it'll come back to me in a second, but I wanted to come on to all of this then that they're talking about here, because I'm going to give you completely logical counter arguments to this. So they're saying the UK economy would be 3.6% smaller by 2040 if net migration fell to zero, forcing the government to raise taxes to combat a much bigger budget deficit. So, okay, so that's the first point, okay, that they're talking about. So let me counter this, and I've got tons of notes. I started writing loads of notes on all of this. So, and by the way, who are the NIESR? They're the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, okay? They are not central. Let me just say that they're not. And the other thing I wanted to look up for you, because I think it's important, if all of the media is saying they're the ones to listen to, well, you know, you want to find out, well, where do they get their funding and everything else? And what do they model? What do they not model? So here's some things that they don't model. You're going to not believe this. Housing supply rigidity. They don't model it, right? And I know my point that I was going to say. So I don't believe the numbers. I don't believe the numbers at all, that we're at, 69 million or something like that now. Because I live, here we go. Because I live on the Isle of Man, I come to the UK occasionally, and I lived in the UK from birth all the way through to, what was I, 37, 38 or something like that when I finally moved. So when I go back each year, I go to lots of different places. So either, and this is the kind of argument, either that on the one day that I go to a certain town or city, all the other surrounding towns and cities have just decided to go there, right? Or there's a pattern, and that is that there's so many more people. And I remember when you used to want to go to, say, a restaurant or something like that, you didn't even need to book a lot of time. You might need to book at, some of the nicer restaurants or whatever, but you didn't really need to book. Now, you got to book everywhere. I mean, I was hungry one night, me and my wife. We just went to this average restaurant, okay? Nothing special. They're like, oh, did you book? No, didn't book. Oh, sorry, we're completely fully booked and there's just no way. I'm like, it's a Wednesday. It's a Wednesday. I mean, you just never hear of these sort of things before. And then you walk around and it's packed with people. Everywhere's packed with people. The waiting lists on, you go to the doctor, you can't get in. You go to, like, a lot of these services, you can't get in. Housing goes like that. Drop it in the comments. You're trying to rent a house or buy or whatever. It goes like that. If you're renting in rooms for house shares, they go really quickly. There's schools, they're all overcrowded, NHS waiting list, transport, you get on the train. You know what it's like getting on the train? It's absolutely rammed. So they don't sort of, this association, this body doesn't measure any of this sort of stuff. And the other thing they don't measure, which, unbelievable, AI-driven labour displacement. So out of all the things that they should be modelling, they're not modelling, in my opinion, the most important things. So let me go back to the article then. So that's what they're saying. It would be 3.6% smaller, etc., etc. And they said that this led them, with the falling birth rates in the UK and a sharp decrease, which they're saying is negative, right? They're saying this is a negative thing, that the illegal, and look, I'm going to say it how it is. It is illegal. Illegal, the word has been sort of changed by mind control in a way. But the word illegal should tell you that it's a crime, right? But if you say that, I think it's a hate crime to even say that now. I could be arrested the next time I land in London for saying that. But it is a crime to go into any country illegally. But you can't say this stuff now. It's so insane. But anyway, okay. So they've said then that this led them to consider what would happen. In fact, let me put it on screen so you can actually read this along with me. They said it led them to consider what would happen if this trend continued to the end of the decade, right? And then they'd say it would stop growing, the population at 70 million, etc., etc. Well, let's just look at that. Let's just look at that for a second. Number one, do you honestly think it led them to consider that? I don't believe it at all. Where do they get their funding? The government, NGO type, organizations. And it says other organizations. Like, you can go through and it will tell you. You can look this up. It's all public domain. It tells you all this stuff. right? So you can go through and you can find out anything you want, where they get their funding from. So it's not unbiased. It's not as if, groups of people from the left and the right give them money and organizations and things like that. No, that's not what happens. They're paid to create research documents. And then all of a sudden, think of it like this. All of a sudden, this article has gone out to hundreds of news outlets. Hundreds of them. It's everywhere, all at the same time. Now, if you think that's natural, then you worry me. Let me just say that. Okay, so let's talk about the first point then. So they're talking about 3.6% smaller economy, and that would equal worse living standards. Well, firstly, that's not true. So they are measuring everything by a very weird, wonky yardstick. So they're measuring based on GDP alone, which I don't think is the way we should measure anymore. I really don't. Not in this world and how it's being fragmented. I don't think we should measure by GDP. See, what you can measure by is GDP per capita, a much better measure, way much better measure. You could also, I think, in the future, what we need to go into is we need to measure by living standards, okay? That's the thing, because they talk about GDP. Well, you look at the GDP of India, it's huge. It's much bigger than, say, Switzerland, but Switzerland has some of the best living standards in the world. So what would you rather have? India, sorry, no disrespect if you're an Indian watching, but would you rather have India or Switzerland? I mean, to me, I know where I would rather live, and nothing to do with, being a white guy or European or whatever. It's nothing to do with that. So I just find this measure really bizarre that they are doing that. And the other thing is, if you keep increasing well, actually, we'll come to that point in a second. And they keep talking about infrastructure, right? Or they don't talk about infrastructure, should I say. Well, when you have a lot more people coming into the country, right away, they need somewhere to live. And it's very easy. You can come into a country like instantly, like really, really quick, but you can't build a house to house them instantly. People don't come with doctors and nurses and things like that. They don't come with any of their own services or infrastructure. So they've got to be put up, right? And I'm not talking just about illegal migration here. I'm talking about migration in general. And they're also saying that this will help with wages. That is a complete lie, okay? It's a complete lie. The less people you have in a country, the higher that wages go. I could give you a load of historical examples here, but, do you remember what happened after the Black Death? The plague that swept through Europe, just wiped out Europe, just completely wiped it out. Well, you went from serfs to free men. That's basically what happened. You had people that could now demand decent wages. You broke this pattern that had been going on for a long time. You look what's happening in America right now. Okay, you're seeing wages in sort of contractors, and by contractors I mean, because I know of what most people watching are from the UK, but some of you won't be, right? So contractors, like your plumbers and your electricians and your roofers and all these other people, these wages are going up. If you're watching from the US, please drop a comment and confirm that if what I'm saying is accurate there. So let me go back to a couple more points, because this is the thing, they're not being honest with this article. And I don't believe the numbers anyway. So he said net zero migration leaves the economy 3.6% smaller by 2040, and this reflects slower employment growth and a smaller workforce. Well, that's actually positive. You want a smaller workforce unless you've got shortages in a certain skill set. Then you don't want a smaller workforce, but then you just train people in that, and the free market economy does that because the wages go up. So it all balances itself out. What they're talking about here is just nonsense. It's propaganda. He says a smaller and aging population would lead to fewer tax revenues. I've got that in green because it's accurate. He is correct there. Opening up the gap between public spending and receipts, causing the government to borrow more. Yes and no. Yeah, but they need to get a handle on the public spending anyway. They need to stop sending billions over to all these other countries that they're sending billions of pounds to. And you saw the expose I did on that with because it's all public domain knowledge. You can look at it all. I find it absolutely baffling that these people are in charge of all the economics when they don't understand, or maybe they do understand, but they're not looking forward. They're basing it off this model that no longer exists. Okay, the world is fragmenting, trade is fragmenting, everything is breaking apart, and we're going into these sort of more pockets, and they're still acting as if everything works the way it did before. They're talking about, we need all this cheap labor, import all this cheap labor, and it will improve the country. If that's true, why doesn't it improve the countries that they've come from? Sorry, I'm just going to say it. I've been to all these countries. Trust me, they are not luxurious, beautiful, walk down the street, all spotless, clean. It's not. So I don't get why they're saying that it will increase and improve the infrastructure and all this. There's no evidence for that, visually and, other ways. So the next thing they said then is that the government will fill this gap by borrowing, which will cause the deficit to increase even further. And we've just had some bad news out. We'll come on to that in a moment. And by the way, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. It's completely free. It doesn't cost you anything. And I've got another free report for you today as well. Let me open that for you. So I've made another free report for you because people have been asking for different things. So I've created this one, and this is all about the psychology of money. And these economists really need to understand the psychology of money and how it actually works, and even the mindset around it, scarcity versus abundance, the neuroscience behind it. So I've gone through all of this. I've made this for you, so you can download that. I'll put the link below. Okay, a couple more points then. He said that this forecast is from 649,000 to 204,000 in the year to June. So this is the fall that they've said in migration. But this is the problem. They're focusing this on the wrong form of migration. So the government is cutting down on good migration, i.e. people that are skilled, coming into the country to contribute to the country. And they're cutting down on this form of migration, but they're allowing the illegal form to increase. It doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense whatsoever unless you know. Now, I wanted to come on to, let me just check that I covered everything from my notes as well. Yeah, they didn't talk about AI. I mean, you don't need some of these workers to come in anyway. AI and robotics is going to make them obsolete anyway. Unemployment, they didn't talk about. Another point I've got on here. Unemployment. Youth unemployment, if I can show you this. Okay, look at this article, another article I pulled up. Cost of hiring graduates shot up after Reeves' tax rates. So this was another one. No one wants to hire graduates at the minute because it's a 7% increase. That's what it actually is. I don't know if it says it on here, but I did the calculations. It's about 7% more expensive now. All sorts of things. We've had this one. She's learned about the Laffer curve at the moment, because if you keep raising taxes, at some point you start to bring in less revenue. I said that 2 years ago when they first, it's a year and a bit ago now, when they first started doing it. They are losing a fortune because they've overtaxed. And then if you look at what they're looking to do now, she's looking to raise even more taxes. This is going to be the nail in the coffin. And let me show you how they calculated this. So they've run out the 26 billion of tax rise. It's already gone, they're saying. There's no wiggle room left at all. She's now looking to come back for more tax rises in the future. I mean, this is going to reach explosion point. And this is what they said, that growth was set to slow to 1.3% next year, 1.1% in 2028, and then 1.4% in 2030. Okay, now what they're not telling you is look at inflation. 3.4, this is the last reading we have, which is December. 3.4%. It's sort of entrenched now. Look at it, it's 3.4%. And they're getting 1.3% in growth. So what does that tell you? We're actually shrinking by 2%. They just don't want to tell you that. But we're shrinking by 2% now. And, I could go on all day talking about this, but I'll wrap it up there. Grab the report. Please subscribe, the usual stuff. Take care, God bless. I'll see you tomorrow for the walk and talk.